I'm Dane Rose. Trauma is almost certainly going to touch you and those you care about at some point in your lifetime. At any given moment, amongst 10, 20 people, there is likely to be one person on the edge of or in trauma. Now, one of the things to be aware of in the phenomena of dissociation or splits, the phenomena of multiple personas, is that within the psyche, the full expression of our human probability field is always there. There may be, as with the bicycle wheel, one of the spokes that is making contact with the ground. One persona that is leading and presenting to the conscious mind. But the rest of the spokes, the rest of the personas, are still there. Now, in the past three years or so, going through one of the biggest traumas of my life, sure, a bit dazed, a bit dissociated, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50% of my energy kind of partitioned, I can still go through the motions of going to work. I can answer the telephone. And so there doesn't need to be a clear indicator that you're dealing with someone who's in trauma or who is dissociated for that to be going on. In fact, in a culture that punishes people for having needs, that punishes people for being vulnerable and emotional, that punishes people for being feminine, in other words, a self-preservation may be to mask off and conceal some of the most deepest needs and turbulence on the inside, to stop other people from being an additional source of betrayal, abandonment, chauvinism, and trauma on the outside. So, what can you do? Well, the hardest thing by far that you can do is to prepare yourself by becoming trauma literate. And I'd reference the mapping video that I'll put alongside of this, and the site Understand Trauma. Become trauma literate so that someone else getting in touch with a traumatic memory, with a traumatic state in them, does not trigger your own defense against your own trauma. Because the most intelligent thing that you can possibly do, if you care about someone or you care about the people around someone in trauma, is to help someone end the traumatic state, which will release them from their reptilian brainstem into the empathic and transcendent areas of the brain, depending on the quality of the environment. At which point, their chance of harming themselves or anyone else goes down at least 80%. So you want to get to that point where the reptilian brainstem in the person experiencing trauma receives the information that they are no longer surrounded by sociopaths, as defined by the fact that there is help for the actual or perceived trauma. Now, when you have repressed and regressed trauma from childhood that doesn't get dealt with, that protection from trauma may be protection to deal with the feelings that seemed like they would kill the infant, or to express the feelings that seemed like they would lead to death in an abusive parental situation where the child tries to express what's going on and ends up being punished in an unregulated energy that, of course, dwarfs the child's and thus threatens them with death. So you want to be comfortable with your own traumatic terrain. If you haven't done your work, if you can't swim, don't expect to be able to take a drowning person out of the water. You've got to be a good swimmer, and you've got to keep yourself regulated. In the same way, they say approach a drowning person with feet first and make sure that they will not flail around manically and pull you down. You've got to be able to have that kind of communication. Can I approach? Are you stable? Can we dialogue on a rational level? Or are you in compulsive fight, flight, freeze where you're not rational? So you've got to approach and establish that link. You're not going to be able to be a safe person and a stable person for them if you haven't done your own work. So if you haven't, the kindest thing you may be able to do if you want to help someone is refer them. Inform a trauma therapist. Inform a trauma therapist. Interview trauma therapists. Find a good personality fit for the other person. And have that trauma therapist reach out. Or maybe you tell them, but I think the best thing, have a trauma therapist reach out and just keep calling and, okay, so I'm a trauma therapist, and I'd like to be as much useful, as much use to you as I possibly can be. Are you open to hearing what I have to say? And have the trauma therapist propose some exercises, be available for certain times, etc. Now, if someone is in severe shock, trauma, etc., you've got to be the one making the initiative. Asking them to be on time, etc. And then blaming them when they're not is another source of trauma. So you've got to understand the traumatic state, and you've got to reach out to them at a level which they can hang on to. So one of the first things you can do, as I say, if you can't handle this, is refer them to a trauma therapist. If you think you might be able to, the first thing to make sure is that they understand the biology and the nature of trauma. So you want to give them a map, like the map where I go over, all the different ways that you can begin to touch what is and what isn't trauma. You also want to give this book, The Body Keeps the Score. It's incredibly high rated on Amazon for good reason. It's the, by far, best extensive overview of the traumatic landscape in multiple cultures, over thousands of years, in multiple different techniques. It is an incredibly insightful book. So you want to be able to have the person you're helping understand the terrain. And you should be, if you're supporting someone, you should have read this book as well. But you don't just want to say, okay, read the book. Like when I had my trauma unfolding, I couldn't read because I had to be too much in my body to focus my eyes. And then I got overwhelmed with what was going on in my body. So this book is available on Audible. Maybe other audio formats, but Audible, to have the whole book downloaded on a smartphone and be able to go for a walk, which takes 50% of the attention away from the reading material, which is at times a little overwhelming, and 50% of the attention away from the body through listening. And so it's overwhelm and stimulation management is one of the key things to be sensitive to for someone who's dealing with trauma. And so finding the format that works for them. Maybe, for example, like I couldn't leave the house, in the first few days. And so, but I could pace the house and have a talk with a therapist on the phone. Unfortunately, I had a terrible therapist who couldn't honor boundaries. So, it was just a complete waste of my time. But I didn't leave the safety of my house initially. And so you need to attune to the person in trauma and find the right format for them. Being sensitive to the fact that they're probably not going to know that that's important to them. So you're going to try and feel like, are you able to read? Is reading more comfortable to you than listening to audio or watching a video? Is a headset more or less comfortable than something else? What about noise canceling headsets if you've got, banging and violent TVs and stuff in nearby, upstairs apartments. Listening. You're not going to be able to listen in deep presence for the time that it takes someone to share what they need to share if you haven't done your work. It's going to make you incredibly uncomfortable. But if you've done your work, and you understand what an honor it is and just what a difference it makes to be listened to, you can sit and listen and validate and empathize so that someone has a compassionate witness in you through which they can look at the events and not be quite as overwhelmed. You need a compassionate witness, and trauma by its very nature floods the system. This is what it's like to look at the object when you're in trauma. So they need to look at the object through your eyes. They need to see what it looks like through you, because you've got the perspective. It's absolutely essential. And then you want to ask for feedback. How am I doing? Am I helping? What can I do to love and support you? You want feedback. Are they calming down at the end of the time listening? And it's got to be about them. That's what creates the safety. When you're committed, when you approach a trauma person, it's kind of like a drowning person. Imagine you're drowning and someone's saying, okay, we've got 10 minutes and that's it. If you're not out of the water in 10 minutes, it's done. Oh my gosh, I'm going to have to do this. It creates more panic. It doesn't calm the system down. But if you say, look, no matter what it takes, no matter how long it takes, I am here for you. No matter what it takes, no matter how long it takes, I am here for you. Do you get that? Okay, now you take the lead. Give control to the person in trauma. Why? Because they're in helplessness, for one thing. So you want to medicate the helplessness. You want to medicate the powerlessness by giving control. You want to medicate the sense of terror and loneliness by saying, I'm going to be there. And you want to medicate the fact that they have no idea how long it's going to take. They're not in control of that variable. Which means when you put boundaries up front, rather than say, I'm going to be there, the person's hearing that and saying, I'm going to fail. I have no confidence. If you say, I have 30 minutes, if you say, if you say, I'm going to be there for you. Now, you can say, look, I'm really interested in understanding you. We're going to get you the resources. I'm going to be here for you. If I can't do it, we're going to bring someone else in. If we can't do it, we're going to get you a trauma therapist. If that doesn't work, we're going to take you swimming and try, see if water will help you calm down. We're going to sort this through. Now, I've got boundaries. I've got limits. I've got attention limits. I've got body limits and all that. But we're not limited to me. We're going to find a resource that meets this energy. And I'm going to be with you until that happens. And it's not going to be perfect. and I take responsibility for not being perfect for you. But we're going to find a way that meets the energy. And you're going to tell me how I'm doing, and we're not going to stop until this is done. That's the message that you want to send, because that's what the person is feeling. It's like, oh my gosh, I don't know how long this will take. This could take forever. That's how it feels when you're in trauma. So if someone says, okay, well then we're with you forever. Well, at least I won't be alone forever. You see, the reality is there's a paradox going on. The more certainty with which you show up, this thing could be over in 10 minutes. You could literally take someone out of trauma in 10 minutes if you are the kind of person with the kind of integrity and trustworthiness that they get that your commitment is solid. They're out of trauma immediately. Okay, I'm in pain, I'm in this, I'm in that, I don't know how this is going to go, but I get that I'm held now. I'm in a container with someone who's going to be there. I'm no longer in danger. Let's just see how long it takes. That can take the trauma out, and it may take a day, a week, a month to sort out all the little details so that, the life puts itself back together again or forms something even better. That a new foundation is formed. But you can move from the reptilian brainstem into just overwhelming emotions in a matter of minutes if you will hold that kind of certainty. You need to ask them graciously for information that they're not going to want to tell you, because we've grown up together in a chauvinistic cult that makes taking up time and space for feminine issues, emotionality being the biggest one, a source of shame. So you're inviting them to take up space in their feminine side of their psyche, around their emotion. And in doing so, you're inviting them to be vulnerable to the 10,000 messages they've received directly and indirectly since birth that says, you're not worth it. You're a burden. We make jokes about people like you. We condescend to you. You're a pussy. It doesn't get more chauvinistic than that. You're not as valuable as a man because you are a representation of female genitalia. It's pure chauvinism. Now, the trouble is, when you've adopted a certain amount of chauvinism to fit in and belong, this is how chauvinism spreads within a cult. When you honor your feminine side, you get shamed and humiliated, so you adopt and pretend to be a chauvinist yourself so that you don't get humiliated and excluded. See, now you've adopted the virus, which now that you're in trauma, you can't stop being too emotional. That's the definition of trauma, is highly emotional. But now you've got an inner critic that is expecting to be excluded, shamed, and punished, which are all traumas, for being in trauma and being honest about it. Now, you on the outside are saying, okay, step into that. How can I help you? And they're not going to want to tell you because they're afraid of your cowardice to honor the feminine in yourself and in them, by your cowardice to honor the depth of your own emotions and theirs, the depth of your need and theirs. They're anticipating that after 10,000 messages that the feminine is devalued. They're expecting you to have some little voice in your head that says not real, not a real man, not a real woman, not a true feminist, whatever it is. They're expecting that. And so you've got to go into that terrain with them and be emotional. Well, what does that mean? It means breaking through some of your own chauvinism, to be emotional, to actually understand the vulnerability and the honor and the trust that's being placed on you, that someone would go into the depth of their feelings with you. Go in there with them. Let them know through your feelings and your voiced feelings that they matter to you. Let them know. Let them feel the emotion in your voice. See, now you're going into the feminine side of the psyche together, which means they're not going to be subject to a hit and run. You invited them into their feminine side. You didn't join them. Now you're in the one-upmanship within the chauvinistic paradigm in which you've both been raised as a cult. So you get feedback. Now there's a specific area that I want you to look for. And here's what goes on in a traumatized person coping with trauma. You're in trauma, you're flooded, it's overwhelming, you can't get any perspective. So what you do is you narrow down your focus to what's called a narrow beam, almost obsessive-like, I'm only going to focus on here, and then I'm only going to focus on here, and I'm only going to focus on here. And what you're doing is you're managing overwhelm and stimulation by narrowing your attention, your beam of concentration, down to a very small particle of reality. And then you're stuck there because you can't open up to the wide vista of reality because it's too fucking overwhelming. Okay, so you want to anticipate that it's highly likely that someone in trauma is going to be obsessing on some little area. You need to find out what that is. You need to find out what it is, and you need to provide safety in that tiny little area. So here's an example. Someone's in trauma, and what's going through their mind is, I've got to pay that bill, I've got to pay that bill, I've got to pay that bill. Okay, so that's where they've zeroed in. I've got to pay that bill, and I'm out of town. I've got to pay that bill, I'm in the hospital, whatever. Okay. So there's apparently a very specific bill that they've zoomed in on, and their whole safety is now being defined by whether or not that bill is going to be paid, whether they're in control in that bill. So you find that out. Okay. Tell me about the bill. Well, it's this specific thing, and okay, so it's really important to you. Oh, I've got to pay that bill. Okay. Now you look at it and you think, well, no big deal. It's just a bill. Fine. That's your opinion. The felt experience for that person is that is their life. That is not just a bill. That is the symbol of the entire rest of their reality that is telling them if they're safe or not. And that's what I would call the safety symbol. The safety symbol. You want to find out what the person's safety symbol is. Why? Because it's the only thing in their view, and if you turn that from red to green, it may take them out of trauma. It may allow them to re-enter the wideband focus that you need to navigate safely in your reality. So you do everything possible to pay that bill with the same obsession that they focus on it. Okay. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to hire a virtual reality system. I'm going to call the post office. We are going to get, updates every 12 to 24 hours on that bill. So, okay, who are your neighbors? Let's go through your phone. Okay, we're going to have 3 different neighbors. They're all going to descend on your mailbox. And what's the bill like? It's going to be this. They're going to take photos of every one of your mail, okay? It's really important. So you represent and you mediate and you take the burden off of the person who, see, they're divided because they're obsessively focusing on that bill, but they're also obsessively focused on looking strange and looking weird and not wanting to be over the top. And their mind is saying, this is over the top, but I need it. It's over the top, but I need it. So it's dividing them. So you take on the role of being over the top. So it takes that weight off them. I'm so-and-so's friend. It's really important that this happen. It's a very urgent situation. You represent it with the level of urgency. Someone gets me. And you get that bill photographed and sorted out and forwarded in FedEx. You want it FedExed immediately. You treat it basically like the person's life, because that's how it feels to them. Okay, we've got 3 neighbors going to go. You're going to get texts from all of them. This bill is going to be FedExed here. I'm going to get it. I'm going to bring it to the hospital. I'm going to do this. We're going to get your checkbook, and you are going to pay that bill. There's no question that this bill will be paid. Now, what you're really telling the person in that narrow beam focus is there's no question you are going to live. Now, as soon as they get that message, now they can start getting healthy again because they're not in panic and helplessness. So you want to find that symbol and you want to answer the symbol passionately and with certainty. The worst thing you can do is be flaky in this terrain. It's profound abuse and ignorance to have someone tell you their little obsession in this traumatic state. No, well, maybe I'll get around to it. Or, oh, sorry, I forgot. Because what you're telling them is they're going to die because they're surrounded by flaky idiots who don't know what's important, and they're going to die. They're going to die because they're depending on a flake. Because they can't move, they can't do it themselves, and it's going to rev them up, and it's going to cause permanent physical damage. So you want that feedback, and you want to be asking, what do you need? What do you need from me? How am I doing? And you want to have humility that small things are going to make a huge difference to them that you do not understand. Now, if you know you don't understand them, because why should you understand them? If you know you're not going to understand them, then it will not, then first of all, you'll have the humility to ask. And secondly, you can ask and help them, if they're willing, talk about why. And if they're not willing, just trust that those little details that they go into are very important to them. So this is what you want. And you want to basically give more and more control at the level that they want control and in the areas they want control. And you want to give more and more certainty in the areas that they're going to survive to, exit the reptilian brain state. And you want to make sure they understand that they're not weird and they're not permanently crazy, but that they understand the mechanisms that are going on in their own biology, that this is a universal phenomena that's been going on for thousands of years, and that the fact that they're trauma illiterate is a symptom of an immature and irresponsible cult. It's not a symptom of anything being fundamentally wrong with them. Share the sense of responsibility. Take off as much weight as possible. Make it safe for them to throw off weight that they can't deal with. And you'll be well on your way to helping a friend or a lover be back on their feet with dignity and honor, knowing that you're the most important person in their life because you actually showed up for them in a way that probably nobody else will or could. Good luck.